Welcome back, everybody. In this lesson, we are going to continue to work inside of our Hangry Prints application, where in the last lesson, we wired up some pretty cool new functionality. We have tabs that are now available inside of this application, and that is working great. Tabs are a really common component you're going to see in a lot of web applications and websites all over the place. In this lesson, we're going to switch it up a little bit, and we're going to talk about what it's going to take to do something similar, but with a totally different component. So what we're going to do first, before we dive into the code or do anything like that, is if you have an active task running in your terminal, so the npm run start is currently running on localhost, go ahead and hit Control-C on your keyboard, and that will stop that active running task. It'll stop the local dev server, and we're going to run a different command this time. So we're going to run npm run start : support. So it's just a little bit of a different command. You have to add :support onto the end of that. And what that's going to do is it's going to do the exact same thing, but you'll see here in this new page that we brought up, it's launching a different page. And this is a file called support.html. It's basically all the same stuff we had in the previous one. So it's the same app. We still get the menu that has that active toggle on it. And it's actually loading all of the same CSS and JavaScript as the index.html file. But the reason why we're launching this page, this support page, is you'll see here, we have some frequently asked questions content. And we're going to, in this lesson, learn how we can transform this into an accordion. And accordions are very similar in their functionality to tabs. You can sort of think of them as just like tabs. You have a number of header links, or in the case of tabs, you have your tab navigation at the top that kind of have headers that you can click on, and then it shows panels. In the case of accordions, it's just a different presentation. You're generally going to have this pattern of you have a header link and then you have a panel right below it. And then you have another header link and a panel below that. And that just repeats over and over throughout the HTML. And basically what we want to do in terms of interactivity for this component is we want to make it so that when we click on the header link, it's going to actually toggle the display of the panel down below it. And just like when we started with our tabs, this is currently just an anchor link that is pointing to the ID of this panel down here. So very, very similar HTML, just a little bit of a different pattern. And if we jump into Visual Studio Code, that's not Visual Studio Code. If we jump into Visual Studio Code and you open up support.html, you can see exactly what that looks like. So let's scroll down just a little bit here. This has the exact same nav bar that we had in index.html, so nothing has changed there. But if you go down to the page area, here is our HTML for our frequently asked questions and all that good stuff. And then, of course, we have our accordion. So we have an outer container div with a class of accordion, and then each accordion section repeats this same pattern right here. So you have an H4, a heading level 4 with a class of accordion header. It has an anchor tag in it, which again is pointed to $print, which is the ID of the accordion panel down below. So just a heading, a panel, and then that repeats. Another heading, another panel. And inside of the anchor tag, we just have a couple of extra spans here just for our CSS. You'll notice there's a little plus icon over here, which I think is usually a good indicator to the user that, especially once we collapse these panels and they're hidden, it's going to indicate to the user that, hey, there's some content, if you click on this heading, that you can expand, that you can look into or dig into. So that's going to be what we're doing is in our script, we want to actually wire this up so that it's going to work just like you would expect to have an accordion in any web application. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll open up our app.js file. This is where we put our tab stuff into in the last lesson. And we'll create a new section here called accordions. So we'll say const accordions equals new toggle. So we're going to create a new instance of toggle with some custom options. We need to set a new attribute, which will be data-accordion. That seems like a good one to use. And we also need a new toggle container. And if you remember, the outer container has a class of simply accordion on those. And once we add this, we have instantiated a new instance of our toggle that's going to be listening for clicks on data-accordion attribute toggle buttons. So now we need to go and add this attribute to our HTML file. So let's go into each of our anchor tags. I'm going to select all the instances. Let me just make sure I don't have hrefs up here. I don't. Good. So I have all the instances of a href, and then we'll just go over here and we will copy the ID of each one of those, and then we'll do data-accordion equals number sign, and then we'll paste that in. So let's just double check that worked in all the cursors. So you can see each one we have a href equals data accordion print. There's work, limit, etc. Looks like it's working good. And then also we want to add aria-expanded equals false. We want to give that a default state for aria expanded, indicating for accessible visually impaired users that, hey, this is not expanded. It has some content that you can expand. So let's go ahead and save that. And you're not going to see anything visually just yet, but you will notice in the dev tools, if you take a look at this first accordion panel, of course, now when I click on the heading link, it's going to toggle that active class on and off, which is working great. Also, let's just double check that the aria expanded attribute is changing here. And sure enough, it is. So that means that we need to go into our CSS and actually add some CSS to change the presentation based on the presence of that active class. So let's go into accordions.scss. You can see this has some basic styles to kind of style up the header and just give some padding and stuff like that. But we do have a declaration down here for the .accordion panel. So we already have that. So let's just simply add, just like we generally do, when it's not active, display none, like so. And then as soon as we do that, you'll see all the panels hide. And now we can toggle each of them on and off. And just like that, we just created an accordion. That's pretty cool, right? And you may be tempted to add the single option to this, but I don't like this, and I'll sort of show you why. Well, it might be kind of hard to see here, but notice how down here, whenever you click on an item that has 2 lines in the paragraph, and then you click on this one, all this content down here just shifted. And actually, let me show you, because I can make it even more glaring, if you will. Let me just duplicate this content a bunch. So we just made a really long panel, basically. I just duplicated that paragraph over and over. So I'm looking at this content, I'm looking at this content, and then I go from this panel up here. And when you have that single option on, you'll notice when I go to how does it work, it just pushed all the content out of the way. And this can be a big issue, because now if I have the ability to scroll, you'll see down here, I may expect to see, where can I find nutritional information? You click on that and it just like moved, right? My cursor's down here. I'm expecting to be able to read it down here. You just initiated a scrolling action without even really trying to do it. We kind of initiated a scroll without the user actually scrolling. And that's kind of a usability no-no. Users hate it when stuff moves around on them. So I know that some people do this. Some people do the whole the single option on accordions, and it is something that is available in some front-end component frameworks. But I really don't like it. You can help with this a little bit by adding some animations so that you could see it move as you open this new panel. But I think it's a bad pattern because of that whole scrolling and jumpiness to it whenever you use the single option. Because again, as soon as I click on this, like it moved and I have to go search for it again. That's a big issue. So I really highly recommend against using the single option, because whenever you turn that off, just as an example, again, let's just duplicate this one a whole bunch. And we'll just paste that. Boom, 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 boom. There we go. If I go down here and I click on this, it doesn't move, right? Because we didn't automatically collapse the one up here. This is going to be much easier for your users to follow. Now, it's still going to kind of jump around a little bit. Like if like we remove all this content and I click here, like we still initiated a scroll there, but that's just kind of unavoidable in some instances, right? Because we changed the height of the document. So there's only so much you could do when you go from scroll down to not having enough content to actually do any scrolling on the page, it's going to move up. But in that case, the scroll actually happened when we're deactivating a panel, right? So that's a little less obtrusive to the user because they're saying, I'm not worried about that anymore. I'm ready to move on to something else. They're not saying, hey, I want to read this. That's the interaction that they're going to care more about because they're looking for something. They're not moving away, moving on. They're specifically trying to find information in that interaction. So that's just sort of my diatribe on don't use the single for accordions, but you can play around with that and use whatever works best for you. And so really, when it comes down to it, accordions are really simple, right? This is basically like an out-of-the-box toggle. That's all we've really done. And I think the accordions are more about presentation than they are about functionality. I think they do boil down to a very simple toggle. I think that's the best user experience for an accordion component. And when it comes to like that accordion feel, it's more about adding the right animations and the right presentation to make it feel more like an accordion. And that's going to be something we're actually going to do in the next lesson. We can say at this point, we have a working accordion. It was really easy for us to set up, really easy for us to add. And in the next lesson, we're going to come back and we're going to kind of do some presentation stuff to really make all of this stuff that we've added, both the tabs and the accordions, in this Hangry Prints application. We're going to make it more accessible and take a little break from the JavaScript and do some fun CSS stuff to make it really feel like a polished, a really great, a usable solution. So stay tuned and we'll check that out in just a moment.